The cattle car lurched to a halt somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, metal groaning against track as if the journey itself was reluctant to end. Inside the converted freight car, 37 women huddled against each other for warmth, their breath creating clouds in the February air that seeped through gaps in the wooden slats. They had traveled for 2 days since disembarking from the transport ship in New York Harbor, 2 days of uncertainty and whispered fears about what awaited them at journey's end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Among them sat Helena, 24 years old, her dark hair matted against her scalp, her skin carrying the gray pallor of months without proper washing. She had been a telegraph operator in Hamburg before her conscription into the auxiliary corps, before the bombs had turned her city into a landscape of broken teeth and ash. Now she sat with her knees drawn to her chest, trying not to think about the lice that had made their home in the seams of her clothing, trying not to scratch at skin that had forgotten what cleanliness felt like. The door rolled open with a screech that made several women flinch. Harsh winter light flooded the interior, momentarily blinding them after the dimness of their mobile prison. American soldiers stood on the platform, their uniforms clean and pressed in a way that seemed almost offensive. One of them, a sergeant with weathered features, gestured for them to exit. His voice carried no malice when he spoke, just the flat tone of a man performing a routine task. They stumbled onto the platform, legs unsteady from confinement, eyes adjusting to reveal a compound that looked nothing like the concentration of suffering they had anticipated. The buildings were solid, constructed of red brick that spoke of permanence rather than expedience. Smoke rose from chimneys, white against the pale sky, and somewhere in the distance, Helena could hear the sound of running water, a mechanical hum that suggested infrastructure she had not encountered in months. Her last shower had been in October, a frigid trickle from a broken pipe in a bombed-out factory where her unit had been stationed. Before that she could barely remember. The accumulated grime of 4 months clung to her like a second skin. She had grown accustomed to her own smell, to the collective odor of unwashed bodies pressed together in confined spaces. It had become normal, this layer of filth, this acceptance of degradation as the cost of survival. The guards formed them into a loose column and began walking them toward a long single-story building at the edge of the compound. No dogs strained at leashes, no rifles prodded them forward, just men in coats walking alongside women in rags, the contrast so stark it felt deliberate, designed to emphasize the distance between victor and vanquished. Helena noticed the other women glancing at each other, confusion written on faces too tired for much expression. Where was the violence they had been promised? Where were the jeers, the spitting, the casual brutality that their officers had assured them was the American way? Instead, there was only the crunch of boots on gravel and the low murmur of instructions in accented German from a translator who walked at the front of the column. The building they approached had steam rising from vents along its roofline, condensation fogging the small windows set high in the walls. As they drew closer, Helena caught a scent that made her heart skip, not from fear but from recognition so distant it seemed like memory from another life. Soap, clean, simple, unmistakable. The smell of soap carried on warm air. She had not smelled soap since before her capture. In the final months in Germany, such luxuries had vanished, replaced by harsh chemical substitutes that burned the skin and left hair brittle as straw. But this scent was different, softer, almost sweet, the kind of smell she associated with her mother's linen closet, with Sunday mornings before the war had devoured normalcy. The woman beside her, a sturdy farm girl named Margaretha who had worked in a munitions factory, grabbed Helena's sleeve. Her fingers trembled despite their calluses. "That smell," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Do you think?" She did not finish the question because the door to the building swung open, releasing a wave of humid warmth that hit them like a physical force. Inside, they could see tile walls, white and gleaming, reflecting light from fixtures that blazed with an intensity they had forgotten electricity could achieve. The air that rolled out was thick with moisture, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of running water, not the drip of a leaky pipe, but the steady rush of abundant flow. An American woman stood in the doorway, her hair pinned beneath a white cap, her uniform crisp and unstained. She wore a Red Cross armband, and an expression of professional efficiency that held no trace of disgust or hostility. When she spoke, her German was careful but clear, each word enunciated with the precision of someone who had studied the language in classrooms rather than learned it in streets. "Welcome," she said, and the word was so unexpected, so contrary to everything they had prepared themselves for, that several women actually stopped walking. "You will be processed here. We will provide you with the facilities to clean yourselves properly." There are supplies waiting inside. Please follow the orderly instructions. Processed clean supplies. The words hung in the air like promises too dangerous to believe. Helena felt something twist in her chest, a sensation she could not immediately identify because it had been absent for so long. Hope perhaps, or maybe just the fear that hope inspired, the terror of wanting something only to have it snatched away. They filed through the door into an anteroom where the warmth was almost overwhelming. After months of cold that seeped into bones and made fingers numb even when wrapped in rags, the heated air felt like an embrace. The Red Cross woman directed them to wooden benches that lined the walls. Another woman, younger, began distributing small canvas bags to each prisoner. Helena accepted hers with hands that had forgotten how to receive gifts. The bag was surprisingly heavy. She untied the string that held it closed and peered inside, her breath catching at what she found. A bar of soap, pale ivory and smooth, its surface unmarred by previous use. A towel white and thick, the kind of towel she had not touched since childhood. A comb, its teeth fine and even. A small bottle of something clear that, when she carefully unscrewed the cap, released the scent of flowers she could not name. Around her, women were opening their own bags, pulling out identical supplies with expressions that ranged from disbelief to suspicion. Margaret held her soap to her nose, inhaling deeply, her eyes closing as if the scent alone could transport her somewhere better. An older woman named Frida examined the towel with the intensity of someone searching for deception, running her fingers over the fabric as if expecting it to dissolve at her touch. "This cannot be real," Frida muttered, her voice carrying the harsh rasp of someone who had survived too much to trust kindness. "No one gives prisoners such things. They must want something. They must expect us to—" But she did not finish because the Red Cross woman had begun speaking again, explaining in her careful German that they would be divided into groups of 10, that each group would have 30 minutes in the washing facilities, that there would be privacy screens and that guards would remain outside, unless emergency assistance was required. Privacy, the word was almost laughable. They had lived for months without privacy, had grown accustomed to performing every bodily function in full view of others, had learned to shed the last remnants of modesty along with their civilian lives. But now this woman spoke of privacy as if it were a natural right, something to be offered even to enemies, even to prisoners who had fought against the very nation now offering them dignity. The first group was called 10 women who rose with visible reluctance, clutching the canvas bags as if they contained treasure rather than basic necessities. They disappeared through a doorway deeper into the building, and those who remained sat in silence, straining to hear what happened beyond that threshold. For several minutes there was nothing but the sound of water running and low voices giving instructions. Then drifting back through the doorway, came a sound that made Helena's throat tighten. One of the women in the first group had begun to cry, not the harsh sobs of grief but something softer, almost wondering. The crying was joined by others, a chorus of emotional release that spoke of something transformative happening beyond their sight. Helena's group was called third. She stood with 9 other women, her legs unsteady not from weakness but from anticipation mixed with dread. They walked through the doorway into a space that defied every expectation shaped by months of deprivation. The room was large, its walls covered in white tile that reflected the bright lights overhead. Along one wall ran a series of shower heads, more than she could quickly count, each one gleaming chrome and positioned at perfect height. But it was the steam that truly captured her attention. It rose from the floor drains in visible clouds, evidence of water hot enough to generate vapor, hot enough to scald away months of accumulated filth. Hot water. They were being offered hot water. Not the frigid trickle that had characterized every washing experience of the past year. Not the icy shock that made cleaning oneself an ordeal to be endured as quickly as possible, but actual hot water in quantities that seemed unlimited. A matron in a white uniform gestured to privacy screens that divided the space into individual stalls. Her expression was neutral, professional, as if there was nothing extraordinary about offering such facilities to prisoners of war. She explained through the translator that they should remove their clothing, place it in the bins provided, that new garments would be issued after they had washed, that they should take their time, that there was no rush.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Take their time. The instruction seemed absurd. When had they last been told to take their time with anything? Every moment of the past months had been measured in efficiency and speed, in doing what was necessary as quickly as possible before the next crisis, the next alarm, the next moment of danger. Helena moved behind one of the screens with her canvas bag clutched to her chest. The privacy felt strange after so long without it, almost uncomfortable in its unfamiliarity. She began to undress, peeling away layers that had become part of her, clothing she had worn for so long that removing it felt like shedding skin. Her uniform was stiff with dirt and sweat, the fabric discolored by substances she preferred not to identify. Her undergarments had holes worn through from constant wear, the elastic long since failed. As she stripped away each layer, she caught sight of her own body, and had to suppress a gasp at what she saw. Her ribs were visible, her hip bones protruding sharply. Her skin was marked with rashes and sores, evidence of malnutrition and poor hygiene. But worse than the physical deterioration was the layer of grime that covered everything, a patina of dirt so complete that her natural skin tone was barely visible beneath it. She had become a creature of filth, and only now, in the harsh light of this clean room, could she fully comprehend how far she had fallen. She stepped toward the shower, reaching for the handle with trembling fingers. For a moment she hesitated, afraid that turning it would reveal the cruel joke that only cold water would emerge, or worse, that nothing would come at all. But she turned it anyway because hope, once ignited, demanded action even in the face of potential disappointment. Water exploded from the shower head with a force that made her jump back. Not a trickle, not a hesitant flow, but a torrent of water that cascaded down with the abundance she had forgotten was possible. And it was hot, not lukewarm, not barely heated, but genuinely hot, steam rising where it hit the cool air, warmth radiating from the spray. Helena stepped under the flow and felt her knees nearly buckle. The sensation of hot water on her skin was so intense, so overwhelming, that for a moment she could not breathe. It cascaded over her head, soaking her matted hair, running down her back, washing over skin that had forgotten what cleanliness felt like. The heat penetrated deep, reaching muscles that had been tensed against cold for so long they had forgotten how to relax. She stood motionless, letting the water pour over her, and began to weep. The tears came from somewhere deep and unguarded, a place she had locked away during the long months of survival. They mixed with the shower water, indistinguishable from the flow that washed away months of accumulated despair, along with the physical grime. Around her, behind other privacy screens, she could hear similar reactions. Women crying, women laughing, women making sounds that had no clear emotion attached, just the raw release of feelings too long suppressed. The sound of abundance was everywhere, water running from multiple shower heads, simultaneously, a symphony of excess that seemed almost obscene in its generosity. Helena reached for the soap with shaking hands. The bar was smooth and perfect, its surface unmarked by previous use. When she wet it and began to work up a lather, the foam that formed was white and rich, nothing like the gray scum produced by the harsh substitute she had grown accustomed to. She rubbed it over her arms, watching as the water turned gray with dissolved dirt, as layers of filth began to peel away, revealing skin she barely recognized as her own. She scrubbed harder, desperate now to remove every trace of the past months, to wash away not just the physical grime but the memory of what she had endured. The soap glided over her skin, creating suds that felt luxurious, almost decadent. She worked it into her hair, her fingers encountering tangles and knots that would require patience to unravel, but for the first time in months, she had the tools and the time to address them properly. The comb from her canvas bag had fine teeth designed for thorough work. She began at the ends of her hair, working carefully through each section, and felt satisfaction as tangles gave way, as her hair began to remember its natural texture. With each pass of the comb, she removed not just knots but also evidence of infestation, creatures that had made their home in her scalp now washed away down the drain. Minutes passed, though she had lost all sense of time's passage. The water continued its generous flow, never cooling, never diminishing. She soaped and rinsed, then soaped again, unable to believe that the water would not suddenly stop, that this abundance would not be revealed as temporary, a brief reprieve before returning to the deprivation that had become normal. But the water did not stop. It continued to pour, hot and plentiful, as if the Americans possessed such wealth that they could afford to waste it on prisoners, on enemies, on women who had fought against them and lost. The generosity was staggering, almost incomprehensible. While German civilians scratched frost from windows to have something to drink, while cities struggled with broken water mains and failed infrastructure, here in the heart of enemy territory, captured soldiers were being offered hot showers with no apparent limit on duration or quantity. Helena opened the small bottle from her canvas bag, the one with the floral scent. The liquid inside was thick and pearlescent. She poured some into her palm, and recognized it immediately, despite months without encountering such luxury. Shampoo. Actual shampoo, formulated specifically for hair, not the harsh soap that stripped natural oils and left hair brittle and damaged. She worked it into her scalp, feeling it foam and spread, its perfume rising with the steam. The scent was delicate, reminiscent of gardens she had not walked through in years, of spring mornings when the world still made sense. As she rinsed it away, she felt her hair transform beneath her fingers, becoming softer, more manageable, beginning to remember what it had been before war and captivity had reduced it to straw. When she finally emerged from behind the privacy screen, wrapped in the thick white towels, she felt fundamentally altered. Her skin was pink from scrubbing and heat, tender in a way that spoke of renewal rather than damage. Her hair hung damp but clean, free of the creatures that had colonized it, free of the accumulated oils and dirt that had weighted it down. The other women in her group were emerging as well, each one transformed in ways both physical and invisible. Margaretha stood with her face flushed, tears still tracking down her freshly cleaned cheeks. Frida, the suspicious older woman, held her towel wrapped tightly around herself, but her expression had softened, the hard edges of mistrust momentarily smoothed by the experience of unexpected mercy. New clothing waited for them in neat stacks, organized by approximate size, not the ragged remnants they had surrendered, but clean garments that, while clearly institutional in origin, were whole and unstained. Helena dressed in trousers that actually fit, a shirt that did not gape with missing buttons, undergarments that retained their elastic. Each item was a small miracle of ordinary functionality, the kind of basic adequacy she had forgotten was possible. As they prepared to leave the shower facility, Helena caught her reflection in a mirror mounted on the wall. She almost did not recognize herself. The woman staring back had clean skin, damp hair that framed her face in ways she had forgotten it could, eyes that seemed brighter without the constant squint against grime and discomfort. She looked human again, not the creature of survival she had become, but something closer to the person she remembered being before the world had collapsed. The Red Cross woman who had greeted them was waiting in the anteroom when they emerged. She conducted a quick inspection, checking that each woman had everything she needed, that the clothing fit adequately, that no one required medical attention. Her efficiency was gentle, her touch careful when she examined a rash on one woman's arm, her voice soft when she assured another that the trembling would pass, that it was a normal response to such profound relief. "There is food waiting in the dining hall," she told them in her careful German. "You must eat slowly, your bodies are not accustomed to proper nutrition. If you eat too quickly, you will become ill, but there is plenty, no one will take it from you. You may eat until you are satisfied." Food. The word triggered responses that the shower had temporarily muted. Hunger reasserted itself now that the immediate need for cleanliness had been addressed. Helena's stomach cramped with want, with months of inadequate rations, with the body's desperate need for sustenance beyond mere survival. They were led to another building, a short walk across ground that had been cleared of snow, past structures that hummed with the evidence of electricity and heat, of resources so abundant they could be used for comfort rather than hoarded for necessity. The dining hall was warm, its air thick with scents that made Helena's mouth water before she fully processed what she was smelling. Tables were set with tin plates and cups, more place settings than could be needed for their small group, suggesting that this abundance was routine rather than special. At one end of the room, steam tables held quantities of food that seemed impossible. Not the thin gruel that had sustained them during transport, not the meager rations of their final weeks in Germany, but actual meals prepared with care and variety. A woman in an apron stood ready to serve, her expression neutral but not unkind. She gestured for them to form a line, to take plates, to help themselves to whatever they wanted, whatever they wanted. The concept was so foreign that several women hesitated, uncertain whether this was permission or trap. Helena stepped forward, accepting a plate that was warm from recent washing. The first serving station held vegetables, carrots and peas that gleamed with butter, potatoes that had been mashed to creamy smoothness. The woman with the apron spooned generous portions onto her plate without being asked, without requiring pleading or proof of worthiness. The next station held meat, actual meat, chicken that had been roasted until the skin crisped, slices falling away from the bone with the tenderness that spoke of proper cooking time and adequate fuel. Helena stared at the quantity available, at the casual way the server added 2 pieces to her plate, as if protein was not precious, as if there was enough for everyone to have more than they needed. Bread came next, sliced thick from loaves that looked fresh and soft, their crusts golden, their interiors white as snow. Butter sat in small dishes at each table, yellow and rich, waiting to be spread with the kind of generosity that Helena had not witnessed since childhood. There was soup as well, clear broth dotted with vegetables and small pieces of meat, steam rising from turens that could feed dozens. By the time Helena reached the end of the serving line, her plate was heaped with more food than she had seen in a single meal since before her conscription. The weight of it felt significant in her hands, substantial, real. She found a seat at one of the tables, setting her plate down carefully, as if afraid that moving too quickly might make it disappear. The other women settled around her, each one staring at their own loaded plates with expressions that mixed hunger with disbelief. Margaret picked up her fork with a hand that shook so badly she nearly dropped it. Freda made the sign of the cross before touching her food, her lips moving in silent prayer or perhaps simple gratitude. Helena cut into the chicken, watching as the meat yielded easily to her knife, as juice ran out, proving that it was not dried or overcooked, but prepared with care and attention. She brought the first bite to her mouth slowly, almost ceremonially, aware that this moment marked a threshold between what had been and what might be possible. The flavor exploded across her tongue with an intensity that made her eyes water. It was not just the taste of properly seasoned, well-cooked food, though that alone would have been remarkable. It was the taste of abundance, of care taken in preparation, of resources allocated not for mere survival but for satisfaction, possibly even pleasure. She chewed slowly, following the Red Cross woman's advice about eating carefully, but also because she wanted to make the experience last, to memorize every nuance of flavor and texture. The meat was tender and savory, the skin crispy with a hint of herbs she could not identify. When she swallowed, she felt the food settle in her stomach like a promise, like the beginning of healing that extended beyond just physical nourishment. Around her, similar scenes were playing out at every table, women eating with the focused intensity of the long-deprived, tears running down clean faces as they consumed food that represented more than sustenance. Each bite was a refutation of the propaganda they had been fed, each mouthful evidence that the enemy possessed not just greater resources but perhaps greater humanity than they had been taught to expect. The vegetables were sweet and buttery, the potatoes rich with cream that had not been rationed or substituted. When Helena spread butter on her bread, the knife glided through the soft spread easily, and the taste when she bit down was pure and simple, and devastating in its ordinariness. This was the kind of food people ate when the world was not ending, when civilization still functioned, when there was enough of everything that prisoners could be fed like guests rather than burdens. Conversation was minimal as they ate, each woman lost in her own experience of the meal, in the private reckoning that such generosity demanded. But there were small sounds, sighs of satisfaction, murmurs of appreciation directed at no one in particular, the occasional gasp when someone discovered a particularly delicious element on their plate. Helena finished her chicken and vegetables, then tackled the soup, which proved to be rich with flavor and filled with chunks of meat and vegetables that would have constituted an entire meal on their own. The broth was clear and golden, tasting of long simmering and careful preparation, nothing like the thin liquid that passed for soup in their previous experience. When she thought she could eat no more, when her stomach felt full for the first time in months, dessert appeared. Women in aprons brought out trays of small cakes, each one frosted with white icing and topped with a cherry preserved in syrup. The cakes were light and moist, the frosting sweet but not cloying, the cherry a burst of fruit flavor that Helena had forgotten existed. She ate her cake slowly, making it last, aware that this might be the only such dessert she would see during her captivity, wanting to preserve the memory in case the abundance proved temporary. But even as she thought this, she noticed that the women serving were bringing out second and third trays, that there seemed to be enough cakes for everyone to have multiple servings if they wished. The excess was staggering. While German children scraped bowls for the last traces of jam, while families saved fruit peelings to boil into weak tea, American prisoners of war were being offered decorated cakes with preserved fruit as if such luxuries were commonplace, unremarkable, the expected standard rather than exceptional generosity. After the meal, they were led to barracks that proved to be as surprising as everything else they had encountered. The buildings were heated, warm air rising from radiators that hissed softly in corners. Beds were arranged in neat rows, each one with a mattress that looked thick and clean, each one made up with sheets and blankets that smelled of soap and sunshine. Helena claimed a bed near a window, sitting on the edge to test its firmness. The mattress gave slightly beneath her weight, comfortable without being too soft, adequate support wrapped in fabric that did not scratch or irritate. She pulled back the blanket to find sheets underneath, actual sheets rather than just a blanket thrown over a bare mattress, another small luxury that spoke of attention to basic comfort. As she settled in for her first night in captivity, clean and fed and warm for the first time in months, Helena found herself struggling with emotions that had no clear name. Gratitude warred with guilt, relief mixed with confusion. The enemy had shown her more kindness in a single day than her own leaders had offered in the final year of the war, and that realization carried implications too large to fully process in one evening. She lay down on her clean sheets, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and felt her body begin to relax in ways it had not been able to for so long. The bed was soft, the room was warm, her skin was clean and her stomach was full. These simple facts felt revolutionary, transformative, impossible. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that shone over Germany where her family struggled with cold and hunger, where cities smoldered and people survived on hope and stubbornness. She wondered what they would think if they could see her now, clean and fed and safe in the heart of enemy territory, treated with a dignity she had not experienced from her own countrymen. The questions multiplied in the darkness as exhaustion pulled her toward sleep. If Americans could show such mercy to their prisoners, what did that reveal about the nature of the war? If the enemy possessed abundance so great they could waste it on captives, what did that say about the balance of power, about the inevitable outcome of the conflict? If those she had been taught to hate could offer hot showers and chocolate cakes, then what other truths had been lies? The warmth of the shower lingered on her skin like a memory made physical, the taste of real food sat in her stomach like proof of impossible generosity, and as sleep claimed her, Helena understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. She had felt the enemy's kindness, had experienced their abundance, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Morning arrived with bells instead of shouted commands, their tone gentle enough to wake without startling. Helena opened her eyes to sunlight streaming through clean windows, momentarily confused by the softness beneath her back. The previous day felt like a fever dream, too generous to be real, yet here she was, warm and rested in a way her body had nearly forgotten was possible. The second shower came 3 days later, and Helena learned that the abundance was not temporary kindness but established routine. Every third day they were permitted to wash, to use fresh soap and unlimited hot water, to emerge clean and renewed. The regularity was almost more shocking than the initial experience. This was not a special gesture designed to soften them for interrogation or break their spirits through contrast. This was simply how Americans treated their prisoners, with a consistency that spoke of resources so deep that generosity required no justification. The camp library opened during the second week, a room filled with books in multiple languages including German volumes their own country had banned. Helena found herself holding a poetry collection she had last seen in her father's study before the party officials had come to confiscate dangerous literature. Here it sat on an open shelf, available to prisoners without restriction or supervision, as if ideas were not weapons to be controlled but gifts to be shared. Music drifted through the compound in the evenings, not martial anthems or propaganda songs but jazz and swing melodies that moved with a freedom she had been taught to despise as degenerate. Yet listening to the complex rhythms, watching American soldiers move to the beat with casual enjoyment, she found herself questioning what culture truly meant, who decided what was worthy, and why she had accepted those decisions without examination. Letters from home arrived irregularly, their contents both precious and painful. Her sister wrote of continued shortages, of neighbors disappearing in the night, of children growing thin despite mother's best efforts. The contrast between her family's suffering and her own relative comfort created a guilt that sat heavy in her chest. She ate her meals in the warm dining hall and thought of her brother scraping bowls. She stood under hot water and pictured her mother shivering in an unheated apartment. The kindness she received felt like betrayal of those who had none, yet slowly, imperceptibly, understanding began to shift. Conversations with other prisoners revealed similar patterns of realization. The propaganda they had consumed was crumbling under the weight of lived experience. If Americans were the monsters they had been told to fear, why did they offer dignity instead of degradation? If the enemy possessed such abundance, what did that reveal about the sustainability of the war their leaders had promised they would win? Margarita spoke one evening of her work in the munitions factory, of the lies they had been told about production numbers, about the phantom weapons that would turn the tide. Frida confessed her growing suspicion that their leaders had known the war was lost long before admitting it to citizens, that they had sacrificed their people to postpone inevitable defeat. The women whispered these heresies in the darkness of their barracks, testing dangerous thoughts against each other's doubts. The showers became more than physical cleansing. Each time Helena stood under the hot water, she felt layers of indoctrination washing away along with the dirt. The generosity forced recognition that humanity transcended national boundaries, that kindness was not weakness, that the capacity for mercy said more about a nation's strength than any display of military might. 3 months into her captivity, Helena received news that the war had ended. Germany had surrendered. The revelation brought tears of relief mixed with complicated grief. Her country had lost, her people would suffer the consequences, yet she could not deny the surge of gratitude that the killing had stopped, that perhaps now rebuilding could begin. The camp commander addressed them in the courtyard, his German translator conveying words about repatriation, about the process that would eventually return them home. But he also spoke of the world they would find there, of cities destroyed and economies shattered, of the long work of reconstruction that awaited. His tone held no gloating, only a kind of weary sympathy for what they would face. Years later, when Helena returned to Hamburg and found her city transformed into something unrecognizable, she would carry with her the memory of hot water and clean towels, of enemies who had shown mercy when they could have chosen vengeance. She would tell her children about the contradiction of captivity, about the Americans who had treated her better than her own leaders had, about the showers that washed away more than filth. The bottles of shampoo with their floral scents, the thick towels that had cradled her newly clean body, the steady rush of abundant hot water became symbols of a truth larger than personal experience. Sometimes the most powerful gesture is not conquest, but compassion, not domination but dignity, offered to those who have none. In the simple act of providing hot showers to prisoners, the Americans had demonstrated a strength their weapons alone could never convey. Helena would stand in her rebuilt bathroom decades later, turning on the hot water and remember that Pennsylvania winter when she learned that humanity could survive even in the machinery of war, that beneath uniforms and national allegiances beat hearts capable of recognizing suffering and choosing to ease it. The warmth on her skin would always carry her back to that moment of transformation, when the enemy became human, and everything she thought she knew dissolved like soap in endless, generous streams of hot water. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.